Dragon's Dogma 2 is a game set to offer a plethora of different playstyles in the form of Vocations, which is Dragon's Dogma's version of classes. And today we'll be looking at all of the vocations that we currently know of as of today, and hopefully this will help you decide on which vocation you should start out with. First, I have to mention that there are seemingly a total of 10 vocations available in the base game, but you'll be starting out as one of the 4 basic vocations, these being Thief, Archer, Mage, and Fighter. While there are 10 vocations right now, 4 of them are exclusive to the Arisen, so your pawn is stuck with the base vocations. Now, it has to be mentioned that yes, I have personally played through Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen at least 2 times now. And so I'm going to make at least some assumptions about what we're going to see in Dragon's Dogma 2 because of my experience in the first game. Okay, so first let's go over the Thief, which is basically a combination of the Strider and Assassin from Dragon's Dogma 1. Now, as far as we know, the Thief only uses daggers, and we don't really know yet in case you can use swords. At least I haven't found any information on this yet, and it seems like daggers are the only weapon you can use as a thief. That said, the solution to this has been Capcom creating a new vocation, that being the Warfarer, which we will look at later on in the video. But as far as I can tell, the Thief vocation is going to be very, very similar to the Assassin vocation, with some Strider abilities mixed in between, as we can see several returning abilities from DD1. Abilities such as Biting Wind, Helm Splitter, Powder Charge, and more. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Thief turns out to be one of the highest damage dealers in the game. Now, as the Thief does not have any ranged attacks, it would be a good idea to bring at least 1 or 2 ranged pawns that can help you take out enemies such as harpies and whatnot. However, you might want to fulfill that role yourself, so in that case, you should pick the Archer. Now, the Archer, just like the Thief, is sort of like a mix between Strider, Assassin, and Ranger. And since this is a bow and arrow only vocation, it's again a good idea to bring pawns that balance you out. So at least 1 melee user if you're going as a Archer. And just like with the Thief, we can see several returning abilities like Threefold Arrow that is now named Barrage, Invasive Arrow, and more. Now again, it's not been confirmed whether the Archer can use longbows as well as regular bows, but it wouldn't surprise me considering that we already have some abilities that we can see in different footage that seems to suggest that we are seeing the return of Ranger abilities. Now, thankfully, the Archer does have abilities and attacks that allows you to keep the distance from your enemies, like kickflips and kicking enemies away from you, and so you won't feel completely helpless whenever you are surrounded by enemies. But I just want to mention, as someone who mained Ranger, I can say that a lot of people are definitely sleeping on the Archer here, because the bow and arrow gameplay in Dragon's Dogma 1 is excellent. Now let's move on to some of the more tanky classes here. Of course, we gotta talk about the Fighter, which is obviously one of the more popular classes from DD1, and I have no doubts that it will be one of the more popular vocations once again in DD2. Now, to put it bluntly, the Fighter is essentially the frontline soldier and the tank of your party. And if you want the simplest vocation to go for any of your pawns, then Fighter is going to be one of the obvious choices, especially if you do decide to play as one of the squishier classes yourself with your Arisen. Now, I'm not saying that the Fighter isn't powerful, because the Fighter absolutely is very strong. And you can take a lot of punishment, but also deal a lot of punishment as well. However, if you're someone who wants to wield big weapons instead of a sword and shield, then I would recommend the Warrior, of course. And the Warrior has seen a pretty major boost in Dragon's Dogma 2. As some of you older veterans might remember, the Warrior was always relatively underpowered compared to the other vocations in the game, partly because they only have 3 skills they can use at any one time. That, combined with the fact that you were slow and lumbering, just makes sure that you're very easy to hit, and unfortunately you couldn't really dish out as much damage as most other classes could in Dragon's Dogma 1. However, in Dragon's Dogma 2, we have at least 2 new additions to the Warrior. One is a shoulder bash that lets you, well, smash into monsters, possibly stunning them. And then there's a new mechanic, whereas if you press your attack button right at the end of each strike when swinging against monsters, your next attack is going to be fully charged again, and you can keep this going until you run out of stamina. Now, this is definitely gonna bring that berserker fantasy into life that a lot of people wanted to see in the original Dragon's Dogma. So if you're one of those players that just wants to go unga bunga, well, Warrior is for you. Okay, so moving on to the magic users of the game. First off, we have the Mage, and the Mage is not really a full DPS type vocation. It's more of a hybrid support vocation in reality, because mages have a lot of support skills, one of them being Anodyne, which heals your party, and it's an invaluable vocation to have on your team. In the previous game, I almost always brought with me at least one mage in my party to make sure that I could heal up my party during battles. And if you want to increase your survivability, I would absolutely recommend that if you're not playing one yourself, then at least bring one pawn who is a mage. They're really that invaluable. Now, I'm not saying that the mage are not strong DPS-wise, but they are nowhere near as strong as the Sorcerer. Now, Sorcerers start out just like mages with a few basic spells, but the more you level up, the more you get access to some of the most insane spells I've ever seen in a game. And with regards to Dragon's Dogma 2, it's not going to be any different. For example, we know that Bolide and Giselle are two spells that are coming back. And Bolide is a spell that lets you call down a hail of meteors, which usually completely destroys any opposition. And if you want to spice it up a little, you can use Giselle, which summons a giant spike of ice that impales every opponent in front of you. Now, of course, these are just some of the examples of what a sorcerer can do, but hopefully you get an idea from what we see here of just how powerful sorcerers are. Yes, both sorcerers and mages are pretty slow in terms of spell casting, but they more than make up for it with the power of their spells, especially the sorcerers. So really what the sorcerer is the prime example of a glass cannon. They're very squishy but extremely powerful. So if you want to roleplay as a god stuck in a weak body, then sorcerer is for you. Alright, moving on to Magick Archer, which is probably going to be the most popular vocation in the entire game, just like it was in the last one. Now, the Magick Archer is exactly what it sounds like. You are an archer that uses magic and a bow. However, you are not using normal arrows, you are using magic arrows. Homing arrows, to be exact. And this is one of the reasons why Magick Archer was always so very popular in Dragon's Dogma 1, is because all you need to do is point your bow to wherever the enemy might be standing, just point it in the general direction, charge your bow, and just let loose. That is a typical playstyle of a Magick Archer. Now, that isn't to say that the Magick Archer is a very simplistic vocation, really, because the more you level up, of course, just like all the other vocations, you start unlocking some pretty insane abilities. One of my favorites, of course, is the Ricochet Arrow, which is an arrow that, when fired, bounces off of surfaces for quite a long time. And it's especially useful in narrow and tight areas like in caves and such. And if you're facing off against a big ogre or something like that and you shoot this baby off, this thing is going to keep piercing that ogre or this big enemy for some pretty massive damage. And if you fire several of these off in rapid succession, well, it's GG's. Now, I can't forego to mention that Magick Archer is an exclusive vocation to the Arisen, so your pawn will not be able to play as a Magick Archer. And the same goes for Mystic Spearhand, the Trickster, and the Warfarer. And we're going to talk about these three now. First off, Mystic Spearhand. This vocation is, yes, technically new, but it is a sort of reimagination of the Mystic Knight. Now, the Mystic Knight is fairly known for being a very strategic vocation where you place traps and enchant your shield with spells that allow you to do damage while also parrying enemies. Now, Mystic Spearhand seems to be equally as powerful, but the playstyle is completely different. So instead of having a sword and a shield, you now have a spear. And instead of being slow and methodical, Mystic Spearhand is a fast playstyle vocation, and you do not have any type of block abilities as far as we know. Instead, what you're going to do as a Mystic Spearhand is dart around the battlefield and teleport on top of giant monsters and stab them in the back. Not only that, but you also do have access to spells just in order to make sure that you're effective at any range. One of those spells allowing you to use magic to toss items and even fallen foes onto your enemies. Now, just like the Mystic Knight, I'm expecting the Mystic Spearhand to be much more involved when we actually do play the game. And it does seem to be fairly advanced considering you don't actually have any defensive abilities. So I do wonder what's in store for us with the Spearhand here. Then, of course, we have the Trickster, and the Trickster is a very interesting vocation from what I've seen so far. Now, at first glance, it does look like this is more like a healer/support class, and while it has support abilities, what the Trickster really is a tank. You see, the Trickster uses a sensor as a weapon, and by using the sensor, they can summon illusions and various other spells in order to confuse your enemy. And one of these spells is a simulacrum, which is an illusion that you can control yourself. And this simulacrum becomes a target to your enemies when you summon it. Now, the Trickster can use the sensor to attack in melee range as well, but it's not very effective. Instead, you should mostly deal damage through your various illusion spells, but really the primary job for the Trickster is to summon simulacrums to draw aggro away from your party. This also means that every attack that the Trickster does draw aggro from all the enemies. So you're going to want to keep that illusion up as much as possible in order to not get hit. But it does look like a very fun vocation to use, and I'm very much looking forward to trying it. And of course, we gotta finish off this video by talking about the Warfarer, which is probably the most anticipated vocation as far as I know. Now, the Warfarer is particularly enticing because this vocation can use every single weapon class in the game. Meaning that the Warfarer can use spells as well as a bow and arrow, or maybe you want to use the Mystic Spearhand weapon, or maybe you want to use daggers as well as a bow and arrow and go back to sort of like an assassin build. You can basically do anything as a Warfarer. However, the downside to playing as a Warfarer is that your base stats are lower than the pure vocations. Meaning that on paper, at least in the beginning, you're gonna do less damage compared to, say, a Sorcerer or a Warrior. Now, another thing to keep in mind about the Warfarer is that out of your 4 skill slots, one of those will be occupied by the ability to switch between 3 weapons. So unlike every other vocation in the game, you can only swap between 3 different skill sets. That also means that no, you can't equip every single weapon class all at the same time. You can pick 3, and then you can switch them out however you want. That said, I'm very excited to try out Warfarer, and a bonus is that the Warfarer can use every single armor type, meaning that if you're one of those fashionista type players like me, then you're gonna want to invest some time playing as a Warfarer. And yes, what I mean by this is that Dragon's Dogma 2 will not have outer and inner armor layers, which is a loss, I agree. I know that a lot of you guys have been upset about that, but you know, it is what it is, and the Warfarer is the solution, I guess, to this. Again, for all you fashionistas out there and people who just want to play a jack of all trades, Warfarer is definitely for you. Now, with all this said, I want to mention something that is very important, and that is to try out every single vocation in the game, if your time allows, because you see, when you're playing as different vocations and leveling them up, you get access to augments that unlock specifically by playing a certain vocation. The cool thing about augmentations, however, is that you can then use those augmentations for other vocations. So in reality, you really shouldn't just pick one vocation and play with. You should try basically everyone out and maxing them out as much as you can, because that is a key to making your character as strong as possible. Another misconception that I've seen a lot from newcomers is the idea that when you pick a vocation for your pawn is stuck with that vocation. But no, that's not true. Your pawn can switch between vocations as well. The base ones, that is. So don't worry, if you want to make your pawn into a tank instead of a magic wielder, you absolutely can. Alright, that'll have to do for this video. A massive shout out to every channel member. Thank you all for the support so far. I really do appreciate it. And if you like what you've seen here, then remember to like the video and subscribe to Mr. Holton, signing out.